As the seasons continued to change, Lake Serenity became more than just a picturesque body of water surrounded by homes. It evolved into a living, breathing testament to what happens when people come together with mutual respect and shared purpose. The newcomer, who had once been seen as an outsider, was now at the heart of this transformation. She wasn't just the owner of the lake. She had become its caretaker, its connector, and in many ways, its soul. The community's newfound unity didn't mean that challenges disappeared entirely. There were still disagreements, sometimes heated ones, but they were handled differently. Now, instead of resorting to anger or exclusion, residents found themselves sitting down together, talking things through, and finding solutions that worked for everyone. It wasn't always easy, but the effort paid off. Slowly, trust replaced suspicion, and collaboration replaced conflict. One of the biggest milestones came during the spring cleanup event. Every year, residents would gather to tidy up the shoreline, clear debris from the water, and plant new vegetation along the banks. In previous years, participation had been lackluster, with only a handful of people showing up to do the work, while others stayed home, assuming someone else would handle it. But this time was different. Dozens of volunteers arrived early, armed with gloves, trash bags, and a shared determination to make their lake shine. The newcomer played a key role in organizing the event, but she also rolled up her sleeves and joined in alongside everyone else. She laughed as children raced each other to collect the most litter, cheered on teenagers hauling fallen branches, and offered words of encouragement to older residents sorting recyclables. By the end of the day, the entire area gleamed with renewed vitality, and so did the faces of those who had worked together to achieve it. That evening, as the sun dipped low on the horizon, the community gathered for a potluck dinner by the water. Tables groaned under the weight of homemade dishes, steaming casseroles, fresh salads, baskets of warm bread, and desserts piled high. Someone strummed a guitar softly in the background, while others chatted and laughed, their voices mingling with the gentle lapping of the waves. The ex-chairwoman stood up unexpectedly, holding a glass of lemonade aloft. For a moment, the crowd fell silent, curious about what she might say. "I never thought I'd admit this," she began, her tone hesitant but sincere, "but I was wrong about a lot of things." A few chuckles rippled through the audience, easing the tension. "When you first got here," she said, nodding toward the newcomer, "I saw you as a threat, a disruption to everything we'd built. But over these past months, I've realized something important. You didn't come here to take anything away from us. You came here to give us something far more valuable, a chance to see our community in a new light." Her voice wavered slightly as she continued, "You reminded us why we love this place, not because it's perfect, but because it's ours, and because we're stronger when we stand together instead of tearing each other apart." She raised her glass higher. "So thank you for everything." The applause that followed was thunderous, heartfelt, and long-lasting. The newcomer blushed, clearly moved, and simply nodded in gratitude. Words weren't needed in that moment. The bond between them spoke louder than any speech ever could. As summer approached, life at Lake Serenity settled into a rhythm that felt almost magical. People spent their days fishing, swimming, kayaking, and picnicking along the shore. Children built sandcastles on the beach, their laughter carrying across the water. Evenings were reserved for bonfires, stargazing, and impromptu storytelling sessions. The sense of connection that had started with small gestures, a cup of coffee, a shared laugh had blossomed into something profound. The newcomer continued to lead by example, always looking for ways to strengthen the community. When a young family struggled financially after losing their primary source of income, she quietly organized a fundraiser, framing it as a welcome party to avoid embarrassing them. When an elderly resident fell ill and needed help maintaining Her garden, neighbors rallied to take turns tending to it, ensuring her flowers bloomed as brightly as ever. These acts of kindness rippled outward, inspiring others to pay it forward. Even the ex-chairwoman found herself stepping into a new role within the community. No longer burdened by the weight of leadership, she discovered a passion for mentoring younger residents. She taught kids how to fish, shared stories about the lake's history, and even led workshops on sustainable gardening. Her expertise and dedication earned her a newfound respect, proving that growth and redemption are possible no matter your age or past mistakes. By fall, the changes at Lake Serenity were undeniable. What had once been a fractured, distrustful neighborhood was now a tight-knit community united by shared values and experiences. People looked out for one another, celebrated milestones together, and took pride in preserving the natural beauty of their surroundings. The lake itself seemed to reflect this harmony, its waters calm and clear, mirroring the peace that had taken root on its shores. On a crisp October morning, the newcomer hosted a special gathering aboard her houseboat. She invited everyone to join her for breakfast, a spread of pancakes, bacon, fruit, and hot cider. As the group settled in, savoring the cozy atmosphere, she stood up to address them. "I want to start by saying thank you," she began, her voice warm and steady. "Thank you for welcoming me into your lives, for trusting me, and for working alongside me to create something truly special here. When I first arrived, I had no idea what lay ahead. All I wanted was a quiet place to call home. But what I found was so much more, a community that has taught me the power of forgiveness, resilience, and teamwork." She paused, glancing around at the familiar faces before continuing. "Owning this lake has been both a privilege and a responsibility. It's shown me that ownership isn't about control, it's about stewardship. About protecting what matters most and sharing it with others. Together, we've turned this place into something extraordinary. And I know it will continue to grow and thrive long after I'm gone." Her words hung in the air, met with nods and murmurs of agreement. Then, surprising everyone, including herself, she pulled out a small wooden box and placed it on the table. Inside was a set of keys. "These belong to all of you," she announced, smiling. "They're symbolic, of course. They represent my commitment to keeping this community open, inclusive, and collaborative. From today onward, every decision about the lake will be made collectively. We'll form a council of volunteers from among you to oversee maintenance, plan events, and ensure that Lake Serenity remains a place we can all be proud of." The room erupted in cheers and applause. Some wiped away tears, overwhelmed by the gesture. Others hugged her tightly, thanking her for her generosity and vision. For the first time, the lake truly felt like it belonged to everyone, not just one person. Looking back on everything that had transpired, the newcomer couldn't help but marvel at how far they'd come. Owning Lake Serenity had been unexpected, challenging and rewarding in equal measure. It had taught her lessons she never anticipated about power, humility, forgiveness, and the strength of human connection. She had started out seeking solitude but ended up finding something far richer, a sense of belonging. As winter approached and the lake grew quieter, she often sat on her deck, wrapped in a blanket, watching the mist rise off the water. The world felt peaceful, full of possibility. She knew there would still be ups and downs ahead, moments of tension or uncertainty. But she also knew that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to weather whatever came their way. Lake Serenity wasn't just a place anymore. It was a story of resilience, reconciliation, and hope. And as long as people cared for it, that story would continue to unfold, season after season, wave after wave. In a quiet little neighborhood, where the streets were lined with neatly trimmed lawns and picket fences, lived a man named John. He wasn't flashy or loud. He was the kind of guy who kept to himself but always waved hello when neighbors passed. by. John had spent years serving in the military before retiring early to chase his dream, a peaceful life filled with hobbies that reminded him of his past adventures. His most prized possession? A massive decommissioned tank. Now, before you start imagining explosions and war zones, let me clarify something. This wasn't just any tank. It was an M1 Abrams, one of those legendary machines that looked like it could survive anything short of an apocalypse. Of course, John's version wasn't armed. It didn't shoot bullets or fire rockets, but it still weighed over 60 tons and stood taller than most cars on the road. To John, it wasn't just a hunk of metal. It was a symbol of his service, his passion, and his love for all things mechanical. He'd spent months restoring it, polishing every inch until it gleamed. Under the sun. John moved into his new home on Maple Street about 6 months ago. The house itself was modest, nothing fancy, just cozy enough for a single man living out his golden years. But the moment he rolled that tank into his driveway, jaws dropped across the block. Some people were curious, stopping to ask questions about how it worked or what it felt like to drive such a beast. Others admired it from afar, whispering about how cool it must be to own something so unique. And then there were those who weren't fans at all. Enter Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the Homeowners Association, HOA. If you've ever lived in a neighborhood with an HOA, you know exactly the type I'm talking about. Picture someone who shows up uninvited to inspect your mailbox for symmetry issues or sends passive-aggressive notes if your garden gnomes don't match the community aesthetic. That was Karen. She ran the HOA meetings with an iron fist, enforcing rules that no one even remembered agreeing to when they bought their homes. From day one, Karen had her sights set on John, and not in a friendly way. The tank became her personal nemesis. At first, she tried being subtle, sending polite letters asking him to reconsider its placement in the driveway. It might lower property values, she wrote in her perfectly typed memos. When that didn't work, she escalated, citing obscure bylaws about maintaining visual harmony within the community. But John shrugged it off. He paid his dues, followed the rules, and saw no reason why his tank should be treated differently from anyone else's car collection or boat parked. Outside, things simmered down for a while after that, or so it seemed. On the surface, everything appeared calm. Neighbors went about their lives, kids played catch in the cul-de-sac, and John tinkered with his tank on weekends. But beneath the surface, tension was brewing. Karen hadn't given up. She was simply biding her time, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike back. That opportunity came one lazy Saturday morning. John woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee, and headed out to check on his tank. He liked starting his days like this, just him and his machine, soaking in the quiet hum of the neighborhood waking up. After finishing his routine inspection, he hopped into his truck to run some errands. Little did he know, chaos awaited his return. When John pulled back into his driveway later that afternoon, he froze. Parked directly across his entrance, blocking access to his garage, sat a bright red Lamborghini Aventador. Its sleek curves and shiny finish practically screamed wealth and arrogance. There was no mistaking whose car it was. Only one person in the neighborhood owned something like that. Karen. At first, John laughed. He couldn't help it. The absurdity of the situation struck him as almost comical. Blocking someone's driveway with a supercar? Really? But as the reality sank in, amusement turned to irritation. How dare she do this? Not only was it rude, but it was also illegal. You can't just park wherever you want, especially on private property. He tried calling her immediately, leaving voicemails asking her to move the car. No response. Then he called a local towing company, hoping they could remove the obstruction. Bad news. Nobody wanted to touch a Lamborghini without explicit permission from the owner. Word had spread quickly thanks to Karen's social media. She actually posted a picture of her stunt online, captioning it with something along the lines of, "Teaching this guy a lesson about respecting property values." By Sunday evening, John was fuming. Every attempt to resolve the issue peacefully had failed. As he stood next to his tank, staring at the gleaming Lambo, an idea began forming in his mind. Sure, it was drastic, maybe even crazy. But sometimes, drastic situations call for drastic measures. And if Karen wanted to play games with expensive toys, well, John happened to have a pretty big toy of his own. Little did Karen realize, her actions would spark a chain reaction neither she nor anyone else could have predicted. What started as a simple parking dispute was about to turn into the stuff of legends. The frustration simmering inside John was reaching a boiling point. By Monday morning, the blocked driveway wasn't just an inconvenience, it felt like a personal attack. He'd tried everything he could think of to resolve the situation peacefully. Voicemails? Sent. Text messages? Delivered. Even polite emails asking Karen to move her car went unanswered. Every attempt fell flat, hitting a brick wall of silence that only fueled his anger. John paced back and forth in front of his house, glancing at the gleaming red Lamborghini parked smugly across his driveway. It wasn't just blocking his access. It was mocking him. The absurdity of the whole thing gnawed at him. Who parks a $400,000 supercar in someone else's driveway as some twisted form of revenge? And why did she feel entitled to do so? What made things worse was how quickly word had spread around the neighborhood. Thanks to Karen's social media post, which somehow managed to make her look like both the victim and the hero, everyone seemed to have an opinion about what was happening. Some neighbors sided with John, whispering behind closed doors about how unreasonable Karen was being. Others, however, shook their heads disapprovingly, muttering about how a tank doesn't belong in a suburban driveway. Anyway, John knew gossip traveled fast in small communities like this one. Maple Street wasn't exactly Mayberry, but it sure liked to pretend it was. People here prided themselves on appearances, perfect lawns, freshly painted shutters, and cars that never looked dusty. In their eyes, John's tank didn't fit the mold. To them, it was loud, obnoxious, and out of place. But to John, it represented freedom, hard work, and memories of a life spent serving his country. He wasn't about to let anyone take that away from him. As the hours ticked by, John's patience wore thinner and thinner. That evening, after another fruitless day of trying to reach Karen or find a solution through proper channels, he found himself standing beside his prized possession, M1 Abrams tank. Its massive frame loomed over him, a silent reminder of strength and resilience. For years, he'd poured his heart into restoring it, treating it not just as a machine but as a piece of history. Now staring at it under the dim glow of the streetlights, an idea began to take shape. At first, it sounded ridiculous even to him. Could he really use the tank to deal with this situation? Wasn't that going too far? But the more he thought about it, the more it started making sense. After all, Karen had crossed a line. She hadn't just parked her car illegally. She'd done it intentionally, knowing full well how inconvenient it would be for him. And now, thanks to her refusal to budge, he was stuck with no other options. John climbed up onto the tank, running his hand along its cold steel surface. Memories flooded back, long nights working on the engine, weekends spent cleaning every bolt and panel. This wasn't just a hunk of metal. It was part of who he was. If Karen wanted to play games, fine. But she was about to learn that you don't mess with a man who owns a 60-ton armored vehicle. By Tuesday morning, John had made up his mind. He fired up the tank's engine early, letting it roar to life. The sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood, startling birds from nearby trees and drawing curious glances from neighbors peeking out their windows. Within minutes, a small crowd had gathered outside his house. Kids held their bikes mid-ride, parents craned their necks over fences, and even a few dogs barked excitedly, sensing the tension in the air. Karen arrived shortly after, strutting down the sidewalk like she owned the place. She wore oversized sunglasses and heels that clicked loudly against the pavement, exuding confidence despite the chaos unfolding around her. Flanked by 2 police officers who had been called earlier by concerned residents, she approached the scene with an air of superiority. Clearly, she expected the authorities to side with her. Why wouldn't they? She was Karen, the HOA president, the self-appointed guardian of Maple Street's charm. But when the officers stepped forward to assess the situation, they quickly realized this wasn't your typical parking dispute. Technically, Karen had trespassed by blocking John's driveway without permission. While her Lamborghini was undoubtedly expensive, it didn't give her the right to park wherever she pleased. The officers exchanged uneasy glances, clearly uncomfortable with the predicament they'd walked into. "I gave you plenty of chances to move your car," John said, addressing both Karen and the officers. His voice was calm but firm, carrying a weight that silenced the murmurs of the crowd. "You chose not to listen. Now we're doing things my way." Karen's jaw dropped. For once, she was speechless. Her plan to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, and there was nothing she could do about it. The police couldn't intervene. They confirmed that John was within his rights to remove the obstruction from his property. With no legal recourse available, they stepped aside. Leaving Karen fuming and powerless. Without wasting another second, John climbed into the driver's seat of the tank. The engine growled louder as he positioned the massive machine directly behind the Lamborghini. Neighbors held their breath, unsure of what would happen next. Would he really go through with it, or was this just a bluff? John revved the engine one last time, then pressed forward. The ground trembled beneath the tank's treads as it began moving closer to the gleaming red sports car. Karen screamed, throwing her hands up in protest, but it was too late. There was no stopping the inevitable now. As the tank rolled forward, the crowd erupted into gasps and whispers. Phones were raised, capturing every moment of the surreal showdown. What started as a petty neighborhood squabble had escalated into something straight out of a movie, and everyone watching knew they were witnessing history in the making. The moment the tank's treads began to roll forward, the atmosphere on Maple Street shifted. What had started as a tense standoff transformed into something almost cinematic. Neighbors who had gathered to watch the drama unfold now stood frozen, their eyes glued to the scene in front of them. Some clutched their phones, recording every second, while others simply stared in disbelief. It was like watching a slow-motion collision between 2 worlds. Karen's world of luxury and privilege versus John's world of grit and determination. Karen, for her part, was livid. Her face turned bright red as she screamed at the top of her lungs, waving her arms wildly in an attempt to stop the inevitable. "You can't do this. This is insane," she shouted, her voice cracking with panic. But no one, not even the police officers standing nearby, could intervene. Legally, there was nothing they could do. The Lamborghini was parked illegally on private property, and John had every right to remove it. John didn't say a word as he maneuvered the tank closer to the gleaming red sports car. His focus was absolute, his hands steady on the controls. Years of military training kicked in, giving him the precision needed to handle such a massive machine. To him, this wasn't about revenge or making a statement, it was about solving a problem that Karen herself had created. She'd left him no other choice. As the tank's steel treads lined up behind the Lamborghini, the crowd let out a collective gasp. For a brief moment, Time seemed to stand still. Then, with a low rumble, the tank pressed forward. The first crunch of metal echoed through the street, sending shivers down everyone's spines. Sparks flew as the tank's immense weight bore down on the sleek, fragile frame of the Lamborghini. Its once pristine body crumpled like paper under the relentless force of the treads. Karen's screams grew louder, but they were drowned out by the sound of grinding metal and popping tires. Each rotation of the tank's treads brought more destruction, flattening the expensive car into an unrecognizable heap. Neighbors watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to cheer, cry, or run away. Kids peeked out from behind their parents, legs wide-eyed and fascinated by the spectacle. Even the dogs stopped barking, as if sensing the gravity of what was happening. By the time the tank rolled completely over the remains of the Lamborghini, there was nothing left but a twisted pile of scrap metal. Where a $400,000 supercar had once gleamed proudly, now lay a mangled mess of carbon fiber and aluminum. John brought the tank to a halt, its engine idling softly as he climbed down from the driver's seat. He brushed his hands together casually, as though he'd just finished mowing the lawn instead of crushing a luxury vehicle. "Well," he said, addressing the crowd with a shrug, "problem solved." The neighbors erupted into murmurs and whispers. Some clapped quietly, impressed by John's boldness. Others shook their heads, torn between admiration and disbelief. A few people even laughed nervously, unable to process what they'd just witnessed. Meanwhile, Karen stood rooted to the spot, her mouth hanging open in shock. Tears streamed down her face as she stared at the wreckage of her prized possession. Gone was the confident, self-assured woman who had strutted onto the scene. Earlier, in her place was someone utterly defeated. For a moment, no one moved. The air felt heavy with tension, as if everyone was waiting for someone else to break the silence. Finally, one of the police officers stepped forward, clearing his throat awkwardly. "I think we're done here," he said, glancing at Karen. "Ma'am, I suggest you figure out your next steps." Without another word, Karen stormed off, her heels clicking angrily against the pavement. Her dramatic exit might have been comical under different circumstances, but no one laughed. Instead, the crowd slowly dispersed, heading back to their homes as reality began to sink in. They just witnessed something extraordinary, a battle of egos that ended in spectacular fashion. Back inside his house, John poured himself a glass of water and sat down at the kitchen table. He wasn't celebrating. He wasn't gloating. If anything, he felt a mix of relief and exhaustion. The past few days had been exhausting, both mentally and emotionally. All he'd wanted was to live peacefully in his home, surrounded by things he loved. But Karen's actions had forced his hand, leaving him with no other option. Still, as much as he tried to brush it off, John knew this wasn't the end. Word of what happened would spread quickly, first through the neighborhood, then across social media, and eventually beyond. People would talk. They'd debate whether he was justified or if he'd gone too far. Lawsuits might follow, along with endless phone calls from reporters eager to get his side of the story. Life as he knew it was about to change dramatically. But for now, John allowed himself a small sense of satisfaction. He'd stood his ground when it mattered most, refusing to back down in the face of intimidation. And while he never sought fame or notoriety, he couldn't deny the thrill of knowing he'd taken control of a situation that had spiraled out of hand. Outside, the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Maple Street. The crushed remains of the Lamborghini sat in the driveway like a monument to the day's events. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, whispering about what they'd seen. Some admired John's courage. Others feared what might come next. One thing was certain: life on Maple Street would never be the same again. And as night fell, John switched off the lights and went to bed, ready, or as ready as anyone could be, for whatever came next. Months after the dust had settled, Maple Street began to feel like itself again, or at least as close to normal as it could get after such an unforgettable event. The neighborhood had been forever changed by what happened, but life has a way of moving forward even when memories linger. For John, the aftermath brought a mix of relief, reflection, and unexpected fame. The court ruling in his favor was a turning point. It wasn't just about vindication. It was validation that he'd done the right thing under extraordinary circumstances. Still, winning didn't mean everything went back to how it used to be. People still whispered behind his back, some with admiration, others with lingering judgment. But John didn't let it bother him too much. He knew not everyone would understand his decision, and honestly, he didn't care. What mattered most was that he stood up for himself when it counted. One surprising outcome of the whole ordeal was the outpouring of support from strangers across the country. Letters, emails, and even packages started arriving at his doorstep. Some contained heartfelt notes thanking him for inspiring them to stand up against bullies in their own lives. Others included small gifts, a keychain shaped like a tank, a custom-made hat embroidered with Tank Hero, or homemade baked goods. One veteran sent him a framed photo of an old M1 Abrams with a note that read, "Thanks for reminding us all why we served." John appreciated every gesture, no matter how big or small. He kept the notes tucked away in a drawer, pulling them out occasionally to remind himself that good can come from difficult situations. The attention took some getting used to, though. Reporters continued calling, asking for interviews or updates on his life. A few TV shows even invited him to appear as a guest, but John politely declined most offers. He wasn't looking for fame or fortune, he just wanted peace. Peace, however, came with its own challenges. Neighbors who once avoided him now greeted him warmly, almost as if they were trying to make up for past indifference. Some even stopped by his house unannounced, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infamous tank. Kids rang his doorbell, wide-eyed and curious, asking if they could climb inside or take pictures. At first, John found it amusing, but eventually he set boundaries. He installed a gate at the end of his driveway and posted a polite sign, "Private property, please respect my space." Despite these changes, John remained grounded. His routine stayed largely the same. Mornings spent tinkering with the tank, afternoons gardening or reading, and evenings enjoying quiet dinners alone. The tank, of course, became more than just a hobby. It was now a symbol of resilience and determination. To commemorate the showdown, he added a small plaque near the driver's seat. It reads simply, "In memory of standing your ground." Visitors often asked about it, and John always smiled before sharing the story behind it. As for Karen, her departure left a noticeable void in the neighborhood. Her absence wasn't mourned by many, but it did raise questions about the future of the HOA. Without her micromanaging ways, things loosened up considerably. Meetings became shorter, rules less rigid, and overall morale improved. A new president was elected, an older gentleman named Robert, who promised to focus on community spirit rather than nitpicking minor infractions. Under his leadership, the HOA transformed into something far less intimidating and far more inclusive. Life moved on, but reminders of the showdown popped up unexpectedly. Local businesses capitalized on the legend, selling T-shirts and bumper stickers featuring a cartoonish tank crushing a Lamborghini. One coffee shop introduced a drink called the Tankgate Latte, complete with a frothy design resembling treads rolling over metal. Even Halloween saw a surge in kids dressing up as tanks, much to John's amusement. When a group of trick-or-treaters knocked on his door wearing cardboard replicas of his beloved machine, he handed out full-size candy bars instead of the usual fun-sized ones. But perhaps the most meaningful impact of the incident was the shift in perspective among the residents of Maple Store. Before the showdown, people had been divided, some siding with Karen, others with John, and many unsure where they stood. Now, conversations revolved around respect, fairness, and finding common ground. Neighbors began organizing block parties and potlucks, determined to rebuild a sense of unity. Slowly but surely, fences were mended not just between houses, but between hearts. For John, the experience taught him valuable lessons about patience, perseverance, and the power of standing firm in the face of adversity. It also reinforced his belief in living authentically. Owning a tank might have seemed eccentric to some, but it was part of who he was. If anything, the ordeal reminded him never to compromise on his values for the sake of fitting in. Years later, when newcomers moved onto Maple Street, they'd inevitably hear the story of the man with the tank and the woman with the Lambo. Some versions of the tale grew exaggerated over time, with details stretched beyond reality. But the core message remained the same. Sometimes, you have to fight for what's yours even if it means going head-to-head with someone who thinks they're untouchable. Today, John's tank still sits proudly in his driveway, gleaming under the sun. It's become a landmark of sorts, drawing smiles and nods from passers-by. Kids race toy cars around it during playdates, and parents joke about keeping spare parts handy in case another Lamborghini shows up. The neighborhood isn't perfect, it never will be, but it's stronger, kinder, and more united because of what happened. And while John doesn't dwell on the past, he knows the showdown shaped not only his life but the lives of those around him. In a world where entitlement and ego often clash, his story serves as a reminder that courage, integrity, and a little bit of grit can go a long way. After all, sometimes the best way to deal with a bully is to show them exactly what they're messing with and make sure they never forget it.